She walked back into his life soaking wet and silent, then spoke 5 words that shattered everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the child he never knew existed. The clock on David's desk showed 10:47 p.m. when he heard the front door open downstairs. He didn't look up from his laptop screen right away. His roommate Alex usually came home around this time from his night shift at the hospital. The sound of footsteps climbing the wooden stairs was familiar, yet something felt different tonight. David was deep into his work, trying to finish a presentation for tomorrow's meeting. His small apartment office was cluttered with papers, empty coffee cups, and the glow from his computer screen was the only light in the room. He had been working for hours, completely lost in his task, but those footsteps, they were softer than Alex's heavy boots. More careful, more deliberate. David paused his typing and listened. The footsteps stopped right outside his office door. When he finally looked up from his screen, his heart nearly stopped beating. Standing in his doorway was someone he never expected to see again. It was Lisa, his former girlfriend from 2 years ago, the woman who had left him without any explanation after 3 beautiful years together. The woman who had simply vanished from his life like smoke in the wind. She was completely soaked from the heavy rain outside. Water dripped from her long brown hair onto his wooden floor. Her clothes clung to her body, and she was shivering slightly from the cold. But what struck him most was her eyes. Those same green eyes he used to stare into for hours. They were looking directly at him with an intensity that made his breath catch in his throat. David's mind went completely blank. He couldn't form a single word. His hands froze above his keyboard. The presentation he was working on suddenly seemed completely unimportant. All he could do was stare at her face, trying to convince himself that this was really happening. Lisa didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, water still dripping from her clothes, looking at him with that familiar smile. It was the same smile that used to make his day better whenever he was stressed or tired. But now it seemed different somehow. There was something behind it that he couldn't understand. Without breaking eye contact, she slowly reached for her wet jacket. Her movements were careful and deliberate. She slipped it off her shoulders and let it fall to the floor with a soft thud. The sound seemed incredibly loud in the quiet apartment. David wanted to speak. He wanted to ask her what she was doing here. He wanted to demand answers about why she had left without saying goodbye. He wanted to tell her how much she had hurt him. But his voice seemed to have completely disappeared. She kicked off her wet shoes next, still maintaining that intense eye contact. Then she reached for the bottom of her soaked sweater and pulled it over her head, revealing the simple white shirt underneath. Every movement seemed to have a purpose, like she was trying to tell him something without using words. David's heart was racing now. He could hear it pounding in his ears. Memories of their time together flooded his mind. Their first date at that small coffee shop downtown. The way she used to laugh at his terrible jokes. The lazy Sunday mornings they spent together. The day she told him she loved him. And then, the morning he woke up to find her gone, with only a short note saying she needed to leave. For 2 years, he had tried to understand why she left. He had called her friends, but they said they didn't know where she was. He had driven by her old apartment countless times, but someone else lived there now. He had even hired a private investigator. But the trail went cold after she left the city. And now here she was, standing in his doorway like nothing had happened. Like 2 years hadn't passed. Like she hadn't completely destroyed his ability to trust anyone ever again. The rain outside was getting heavier. He could hear it hitting his windows harder now. The storm that had started earlier in the evening was turning into something more serious. But inside his small office, everything felt completely still, except for the sound of his own heartbeat. Lisa was still smiling at him. Not a happy smile, not a sad smile, but something in between. Something that seemed to carry the weight of everything that had happened between them. Something that suggested she knew exactly how confused and hurt he was feeling right now. David realized he was still staring at her like a statue. He tried to move, tried to say something, anything, but his body wouldn't cooperate. It was like he was trapped in a dream where nothing worked the way it was supposed to. She took a small step closer to him, then another. The floorboard creaked under her feet. That sound finally broke whatever spell had been holding him frozen. "Lisa," he managed to whisper. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, like he hadn't used it in years. She nodded slightly, acknowledging that he had finally spoken her name. But she still didn't say anything back. Instead, she reached for the bottom of her white shirt. David's eyes widened. "Wait," he said, his voice getting stronger. "What are you doing? Why are you here?" But before she could answer, before she could explain anything, she spoke her first words since entering his apartment. Her voice was soft but clear, cutting through the sound of the rain and his own confused thoughts. "I need to tell you something, David. Something I should have told you before I left." Those words hit him like a physical blow. Whatever she was about to tell him, he knew it was going to change everything. Again. Just like that night 2 years ago when she left. This moment was going to divide his life into before and after. The rain continued to pound against his windows, but inside his small office, time seemed to have stopped completely. David sat in his chair, Lisa stood by the door, and between them hung the weight of 2 years of unanswered questions, and one truth that was about to be revealed. David's chest felt tight as he stared at Lisa. 2 years of pain and confusion had built up inside him, and now she was standing there like she expected him to just listen calmly to whatever she had to say. His hands were shaking slightly as he gripped the edge of his desk. "You want to tell me something?" David's voice came out sharper than he intended. "You disappear for 2 years without a word, and now you just show up in my apartment in the middle of the night and you think I'm going to sit here and listen?" Lisa's confident expression started to crack. For the first time since she had appeared in his doorway, she looked uncertain. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly seeming smaller and more vulnerable. "David, please," she said quietly. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to hear this." David stood up from his chair so quickly that it rolled backward and hit the wall. "You need me to hear this? What about what I needed 2 years ago? I needed an explanation. I needed to know why the woman I loved just vanished from my life like I meant nothing to her." The words poured out of him now, all the hurt and anger he had been carrying for so long. "Do you have any idea what you did to me? I spent months thinking I had done something wrong. I replayed every conversation we had, trying to figure out what I missed. I called hospitals thinking maybe you were hurt somewhere." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, but David couldn't stop now. He had waited 2 years to say these things. "I loved you, Lisa. I was planning to ask you to marry me. I had the ring picked out and everything. And you just left. No explanation, no goodbye, nothing. Just a note that said you needed to leave." "I know," Lisa whispered, tears now streaming down her face. "I know how much I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think sorry fixes 2 years of wondering what was wrong with me? 2 years of not being able to trust anyone else because I kept waiting for them to disappear too?" Lisa moved to his small couch and sat down heavily. She put her head in her hands for a moment, taking deep breaths like she was trying to gather courage. When she looked up at him again, her face was pale. "You're right to be angry," she said. "You're right about everything. But David, there was a reason I left. A reason I couldn't tell you at the time. What reason could possibly justify what you did?" David demanded, still standing by his desk with his arms crossed. Lisa took another shaky breath. "I was pregnant." The words hit David like a truck. He felt his knees go weak, and he had to grab onto his desk again for support. "What did you just say?" "I was pregnant, David, with your baby." David's mind went completely blank. The room started spinning, and he had to sit down before he fell down. "That's not possible. We were always careful. We always used protection." "Not always," Lisa said softly. "Remember that weekend at your friend's cabin? We had been drinking wine by the fireplace, and we got carried away. We forgot to be careful that one time." David did remember. It had been about 3 months before she left. They had gone to his college buddy's cabin for a romantic getaway. It had been one of the best weekends of their entire relationship. They had been so happy, so in love. And yes, they had been drinking, and in the heat of the moment they had forgotten about protection. "But why didn't you tell me?" David's voice was barely above a whisper now. "Why didn't you give me a chance to be there for you?" Lisa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Because I was terrified. I was 24 years old, just starting my career. You were working 18-hour days trying to get your business off the ground. We had never talked about having children. We had never even talked about marriage, not seriously." David felt like his entire world was crumbling around him. "So you just decided for both of us?" "I panicked," Lisa admitted. "When I saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, I completely panicked. I kept thinking about how we could barely afford to pay rent, how you were stressed all the time about work, how we were both so young and unprepared. She stood up and started pacing around his small office, just like he had been doing earlier. I spent weeks thinking about it. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept picking up the phone to call you, but I never knew what to say. How do you tell someone that your whole life is about to change in a way you never planned for? You just tell them, David said, his voice breaking. You trust them enough to let them be part of the decision. I know that now, Lisa said, stopping her pacing to look at him directly. I know I made the wrong choice, but at the time, I convinced myself that I would be ruining your life. You had so many dreams, so many plans. You were working so hard to build something for yourself. David felt tears starting to form in his own eyes now. Those dreams didn't mean anything without you. You were part of all my plans, even if I never said it out loud. I didn't know that, Lisa whispered. I thought I was just this distraction from your real goals. I thought if I told you about the baby, you would feel trapped. You would stay with me out of obligation, not love, and eventually you would resent me for it. David stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the rain that was still pounding against the glass. His reflection stared back at him, and he barely recognized the man he saw there. 2 years ago, he had been someone who believed in forever. Now he was someone who had learned that forever could end without warning. What happened to the baby? He asked without turning around. His voice was so quiet that Lisa almost didn't hear him. There was a long pause before she answered. I had him. I had our son. David spun around so fast that he almost lost his balance. Him? We have a son? Lisa nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. His name is Charlie. He just turned 2 years old last month. David felt like someone had just punched him in the stomach. Where is he? Is he okay? Is he healthy? He's perfect, Lisa said, and for the first time since she had arrived, her smile was genuine. He's smart and funny and full of energy. He has your dark hair and your brown eyes. He even has that stubborn chin that runs in your family. Where is he? David repeated, his voice urgent now. Lisa reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her photos for a moment, then handed the phone to David. On the screen was a picture of a little boy with messy dark hair, sitting in a high chair and grinning at the camera. His face was covered in what looked like birthday cake, and his brown eyes were sparkling with mischief. David stared at the photo and felt his heart break and heal at the same time. That was his second birthday party, Lisa said softly. He loves chocolate cake just like you do. David scrolled through more photos with trembling fingers. Charlie playing with building blocks. Charlie sleeping peacefully in a crib. Charlie taking his first steps. Charlie laughing at something off camera. Each photo was like a small knife in David's heart, showing him moments of his son's life that he had missed. He's beautiful, David whispered, unable to take his eyes off the photos. He looks just like you, Lisa finished. Everyone says so. He even has your habit of tilting his head when he's concentrating on something. David looked up from the phone, and Lisa could see the pain in his eyes. I missed 2 years of his life. His first words, his first steps, his first birthday. I missed everything. I know, Lisa said, her voice breaking. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for taking that away from you. Where is he now? David asked, handing the phone back to her. Lisa took a deep breath before answering. He's with his adoptive parents. A couple named Robert and Kate. They're wonderful people who love him very much. David felt the blood drain from his face. You gave him away? I had to, Lisa said quickly, seeing the look of horror on David's face. I couldn't take care of him on my own. I was working 3 jobs just to pay for a tiny apartment. I wanted him to have a real family with 2 parents who could give him everything he deserved. David sat down heavily in his chair, putting his head in his hands. I can't believe this. I have a son and he's being raised by strangers. They're not strangers, Lisa said defensively. Robert and Kate are amazing people. They tried for years to have children of their own before they decided to adopt. They love Charlie like he's their biological child. But he's not their biological child, David said, looking up at her with eyes full of pain. He's mine. He's ours. And now he's living with people I've never even met. Lisa moved closer to him, kneeling down beside his chair. David, I know this is a lot to process. I know you're angry and hurt and confused. But I came back because I realized I made a mistake. Not about the adoption. Charlie is happy and loved and thriving. But I made a mistake by not telling you. By not giving you a choice. David stared at her, trying to process everything she had just told him. In the space of 20 minutes, he had learned that he was a father, that his son was 2 years old, and that he was being raised by other people. It was too much to take in all at once. Why now? He asked finally. Why are you telling me this now after 2 years? Lisa sat back on her heels, looking down at her hands. Because Robert and Kate believe that children should know their biological parents when possible. They've been encouraging me to reach out to you, and because I've been seeing a counselor, and she helped me understand that what I did wasn't just wrong, it was selfish. I made decisions based on my own fear instead of... The next few days passed in a blur for David. He had called in sick to work, unable to concentrate on anything except the fact that he had a son. A 2-year-old son named Charlie who was living with adoptive parents in Portland, 300 miles away. David spent most of his time staring at the photos Lisa had sent to his phone. She had given him dozens of them, covering Charlie's entire life from birth to his recent 2nd birthday. Each photo told a story that David had missed, and it felt like looking at pieces of a puzzle that made up a life he should have been part of. He found himself analyzing every detail in the pictures. The way Charlie held his stuffed elephant, the concentration on his face as he stacked building blocks, the pure joy in his expression as he played in a sandbox at what looked like a beautiful park. David wondered what Charlie's voice sounded like, what made him laugh, what his favorite foods were. On Wednesday morning, Lisa called him. Her voice was careful and gentle, like she was talking to someone who might break at any moment. "How are you doing?" she asked. David was sitting at his kitchen table, surrounded by printed photos of Charlie that he had made at the local pharmacy. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Some moments I feel angry, some moments I feel excited, and some moments I just feel completely overwhelmed." "That's normal," Lisa said. "When I first found out I was pregnant, I went through every emotion possible, sometimes all in the same hour." "Have you talked to Robert and Kate?" David asked. "About me wanting to meet Charlie?" "I have," Lisa said, and David could hear the smile in her voice. "They're really excited to meet you. They want to set up a video call first so you can all talk and get to know each other a little before you meet Charlie in person." David's heart started beating faster. He was going to meet the people who were raising his son. He didn't know whether to feel grateful to them or jealous of them. Probably both. "When?" he asked. "This afternoon if you're ready, around 2 o'clock. David looked at the clock on his kitchen wall. It was already 11 in the morning. In 3 hours, he was going to have a conversation that would determine what his relationship with his son would look like for the rest of their lives. "Okay," he said. "I'll be ready," David, Lisa said before he could hang up. "I know this is all really complicated and confusing, but Robert and Kate are good people. They want what's best for Charlie, and they understand that you're his father, too." After Lisa hung up, David spent the next 3 hours cleaning his apartment, changing his clothes, and trying to figure out what to say to the people who had been raising his child for 2 years. He practiced different versions of introducing himself, but they all sounded strange when he said them out loud. At exactly 2 o'clock, David sat in front of his computer and clicked the video call link that Lisa had sent him. His hands were sweating, and his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. 2 faces appeared on his screen almost immediately. A man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a woman with a warm smile and shoulder-length blonde hair. They both looked to be in their mid-30s, and there was something about them that immediately put David at ease. "David," the woman said, "I'm Kate, and this is my husband Robert. We are so grateful that you wanted to talk with us." "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," David replied, though his voice sounded nervous through the computer speakers. "I have to admit, I don't really know what to say. This is all very new to me." Robert leaned forward slightly. "We understand completely. Learning about Charlie after all this time must be incredibly difficult. We want you to know that we've always hoped this day would come." "You have?" David asked, surprised by this admission. Kate nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. We've always planned to be completely open with Charlie about his adoption. We have photos of Lisa from when she was pregnant, and we've been telling Charlie about his birth parents since he was old enough to understand." "What have you told him about me specifically?" David asked, curious and a little nervous about the answer. "That his birth daddy lives far away, but that he loves Charlie very much," Robert explained. "We've told him that maybe someday he'll get to meet you when the time is right." David felt a lump forming in his throat. "He knows about me?" Of course he does, Kate said gently. Charlie asks questions about you sometimes. He wants to know if you like the same things he likes. Last week he asked if you like trucks as much as he does. David couldn't help but smile at this. I love trucks. I used to collect model trucks when I was his age. Kate and Robert exchanged a look and both of their faces lit up. Charlie would be thrilled to hear that, Kate said. He's absolutely obsessed with anything that has wheels. Trucks, cars, buses, motorcycles. He tries to take apart every wheeled toy he owns to see how they work. For the next hour, they talked about Charlie's personality and daily life. David learned that his son was fearless on playground equipment but scared of loud noises. That he loved having books read to him, especially if the reader did funny voices for different characters. That he had inherited what Robert called an engineering mind and was constantly trying to figure out how things worked. He's also incredibly affectionate, Kate added. He gives the best hugs and he tells us he loves us about 50 times a day. He has this way of making everyone around him feel special. David found himself laughing as they shared stories about Charlie's antics. The time he had painted the bathroom wall with his breakfast cereal. The way he insisted on wearing his superhero cape to the grocery store. His habit of trying to share his food with every dog he met at the park. You've done an amazing job with him, David said sincerely. I can tell how much you both love him. He's an easy kid to love, Robert said. But David, we want you to know that we understand you're his father too. We've never wanted to replace you or pretend that we're his only parents. Kate nodded in agreement. We've actually been hoping that someday Charlie would be able to have relationships with both his adoptive family and his biological family. We think that would make him feel even more loved and secure. David felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had been worried that Robert and Kate might see him as a threat or an unwelcome complication in their family. Instead, they seemed genuinely happy that he wanted to be part of Charlie's life. What would that look like practically? David asked. I mean, how would we make this work? Robert and Kate looked at each other, and David could tell they had already thought about this quite a bit. We'd like to start slowly, Kate said. Maybe you could come to Portland for a weekend and meet Charlie. We could see how he responds to you and how you feel about everything once you meet him in person. We're thinking you could be like a special uncle figure in his life, Robert added. Someone who loves him and spends time with him but without confusing him about who his day-to-day parents are. David considered this. It wasn't exactly what he had imagined when he first learned he had a son. He had pictured himself teaching Charlie to ride a bike, helping with homework, being there for all the big moments. But Robert and Kate were Charlie's real parents. They were the ones who had been there for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every milestone. I think I can work with that, David said finally. I just want to be part of his life in whatever way makes sense for everyone involved. Kate's smile grew even brighter. We were really hoping you'd say that. Charlie is going to be so excited to finally meet his birth daddy. They talked for another 30 minutes about logistics. David could visit in 2 weeks when Robert had some time off work. They would plan activities that Charlie enjoyed, like going to the children's museum and playing at the park. David could stay in their guest room if he was comfortable with that, or they could help him find a nearby hotel. One more thing, Kate said as the call was winding down. Charlie loves getting mail. If you want to send him a card or a small gift before your visit, I think he would be thrilled. It might help him get excited about meeting you. After the call ended, David sat in his quiet apartment and tried to process everything that had just happened. In 2 weeks, he was going to meet his son for the first time. He was going to look into those brown eyes that looked so much like his own. And Charlie was going to know that this was his birth daddy. David immediately went online and started looking for the perfect gift to send to Charlie. After browsing for an hour, he found it. A wooden truck building kit designed for toddlers. Something they could build together when he visited. As he filled out the shipping information, David realized that for the first time since Lisa had walked back into his life, he felt hopeful instead of just confused and hurt. He was going to be part of his son's life. It might not look the way he had originally imagined, but Charlie was going to know that his birth father loved him and wanted to be there for him. 2 weeks suddenly felt like a very long time to wait. The plane touched down in Portland at 3:15 p.m. on a sunny Friday afternoon. David gripped the armrests of his seat as they landed, his stomach doing nervous flips that had nothing to do with the flight. In less than an hour, he was going to meet his son for the first time. The past 2 weeks had dragged by slower than any time period in David's life. He had sent Charlie the wooden truck kit, along with a simple card that said, "From someone who loves you very much." Kate had called him the next day to tell him that Charlie had carried the card around the house for 3 days, asking everyone to read it to him over and over. David had also spent those 2 weeks reading every parenting blog and child development article he could find online. He wanted to understand what a 2-year-old was like, what they enjoyed, how to talk to them. He had practiced conversations in his mirror, trying out different ways to introduce himself to Charlie. Now, walking through the Portland airport with his overnight bag, David felt like his heart might beat right out of his chest. He spotted Lisa waiting by the baggage claim area, wearing a simple green dress and looking almost as nervous as he felt. "How was your flight?" she asked as they walked toward the parking garage. "Terrifying," David admitted. "I don't think I've ever been this scared in my entire life. What if he doesn't like me? What if I say something wrong? What if I make him cry?" Lisa smiled gently as they got into her car. "David, you're overthinking this. Charlie is 2 years old. He's not going to judge you or analyze everything you say. Kids that age just respond to kindness and attention. If you're genuine with him, he'll warm up to you." The drive to Robert and Kate's house took about 20 minutes, but it felt like hours to David. Lisa told him more about Charlie's current favorite things: a stuffed elephant named Peanut, building blocks, and a book about farm animals that he insisted on hearing at least 3 times every day. "He's been talking about you all week," Lisa said as they pulled into a driveway in front of a cozy 2-story house with a big front yard. "He keeps asking when his birth daddy is coming to play trucks with him." David's heart melted a little at hearing this. His son was actually excited to meet him. Kate opened the front door before they even had a chance to knock. Her face was glowing with excitement, and she immediately pulled David into a warm hug. "We're so happy you're here," she said. "Charlie has been at the window looking for you for the past hour. Robert is trying to keep him occupied in the living room, but he's about to burst with excitement." David followed Kate and Lisa inside, his legs feeling a little shaky. The house was warm and welcoming, with family photos covering the walls and the comfortable chaos that comes with having a toddler. Toys were scattered around in organized piles, and David could hear the sound of a little voice chattering excitedly from the next room. "Charlie," Kate called out as they walked toward the living room, "your special visitor is here." David stepped into the living room and saw Robert sitting on the floor with a little boy who had dark hair that stuck up in every direction. The child was holding a red truck and was in the middle of explaining something very important to Robert about how the wheels worked. When Charlie looked up and saw David, he went completely quiet. His big brown eyes that looked exactly like David's own, studied this new person with the serious expression that little kids get when they're trying to figure something out. For a moment, nobody said anything. David knelt down so he was at Charlie's eye level, not wanting to seem too big and intimidating. "Hi, Charlie," David said softly. "I'm David, I'm your birth daddy." Charlie tilted his head to one side, still holding his red truck. Then, without any warning, he walked over to David and held out the truck. "Truck," Charlie said simply, offering it to David like it was the most precious thing he owned. David took the truck with trembling hands. "Wow, this is a really cool truck. I bet it goes super fast." Charlie nodded seriously. "Fast truck, red truck. My favorite. It's my favorite too," David said, and he meant it completely. This little red truck had just become the most important object in the world to him, because his son had chosen to share it. For the next few minutes, Charlie showed David all of his trucks. He had a fire truck with a working ladder, a dump truck that could carry blocks, and a tow truck that could pull the other vehicles around the carpet. Charlie explained the purpose of each truck with the seriousness of a college professor giving a lecture. David found himself relaxing as they played. Charlie's enthusiasm was infectious, and it was impossible to stay nervous around someone who got so excited about toy trucks. When David pulled out the wooden truck kit he had brought, Charlie's eyes went wide with wonder. "For me?" Charlie asked, touching the box carefully like he couldn't believe it was real. "For both of us," David said. "We can build it together." They spent the next hour on the living room floor, carefully following the instructions to build the wooden truck. Charlie was surprisingly good at following directions for a 2-year-old, and he clapped his hands excitedly each time they completed a step. "Look, Kate," Charlie called out when they finished. "David and me made truck." Kate came over to admire their work, and David felt a surge of pride at Charlie's excitement. This was what it felt like to make his son happy. When it was time for lunch, Charlie insisted that David sit next to him at the small table in the kitchen. Charlie told David about his favorite foods, peanut butter sandwiches cut into triangles and apple slices, and asked David what he liked to eat. "I like pizza," David said. "Do you like pizza?" Charlie nodded enthusiastically. "Pizza good. Cheese pizza best." After lunch, Kate suggested they all go to the park nearby. Charlie immediately grabbed David's hand and started pulling him toward the door. "Swings," Charlie announced. "David pushed me on swings." At the park, David discovered that his son was completely fearless. Charlie climbed to the top of the highest slide without hesitation, swung from monkey bars that seemed too big for his little hands, and ran around the playground with endless energy. David pushed Charlie on the swings while the little boy shrieked with laughter and demanded to go higher, higher. They went down the big slide together, with Charlie sitting between David's legs and squealing with delight the whole way down. "Again! Again!" Charlie shouted each time they reached the bottom. David had never felt so purely happy in his entire life. Watching Charlie's face light up with joy, hearing his infectious laughter, feeling those tiny hands trust him completely. It was better than anything he could have imagined. As the afternoon went on, Charlie became more and more attached to David. He wanted David to help him across the monkey bars. He brought David flowers he had picked from the edge of the playground. He shared his crackers from his snack bag without being asked. "You're a natural at this," Robert said quietly to David while Charlie was busy climbing on the jungle gym. "He doesn't usually warm up to new people this quickly." "He's an incredible kid," David replied, watching his son navigate the playground equipment with determination. "You and Kate have done such an amazing job with him." "He makes it easy," Robert said with a smile. "Charlie just has this way of bringing out the best in everyone around him." When it was time to head back to the house, Charlie was getting tired and a little cranky. Without thinking about it, David picked him up and carried him to the car. Charlie rested his head on David's shoulder, and David felt something click into place in his heart. This was what it felt like to be someone's dad. Back at the house, Kate announced it was time for Charlie's afternoon nap. Charlie looked disappointed. "David stay?" he asked hopefully. "David will be here when you wake up," Kate promised. "He's staying for dinner, too." Charlie seemed satisfied with this answer. He gave David a sleepy hug and toddled off to his room with Kate. David sat in the living room with Robert and Lisa while Charlie napped. They talked about how the day had gone and what the future might look like. Robert and Kate were amazed at how quickly Charlie had bonded with David. "We were prepared for this to take several visits," Robert admitted, "but Charlie acts like he's known you his whole life." When Charlie woke up from his nap, he immediately came looking for David. They spent the rest of the afternoon reading books together on the couch, with Charlie snuggled up against David's side like it was the most natural thing in the world. Charlie wanted David to do all the funny voices when they read his farm animal book. He giggled uncontrollably when David made pig noises and cow sounds. When they finished the book for the third time, Charlie looked up at David with those big brown eyes. "Read again?" he asked hopefully. "Of course," David said, and he meant it. He would read that book 100 times if it made Charlie happy. As evening approached and it was time for David to head back to his hotel, Charlie seemed to understand that something was changing. He became more clingy, wanting to sit on David's lap and hold his hand. "When David come back?" Charlie asked as they sat together on the couch. "Tomorrow," David promised. "We're going to go to the Children's Museum tomorrow and see all the cool exhibits." Charlie's face brightened at this news. "Museum with David!" When it was finally time to say goodbye, Charlie gave David the biggest, tightest hug his little arms could manage. "Love you, David," Charlie whispered into David's ear. David felt tears start to form in his eyes. "I love you too, Charlie." 6 months later, David was sitting in his newly decorated apartment in Portland waiting for his favorite part of the week. At exactly 7 o'clock, his phone would ring, and Charlie's excited voice would fill his living room through the video call. Moving to Portland hadn't been an easy decision. David had to restructure his entire business, find new clients, and start over in a new city. But sitting in his apartment just 15 minutes away from his son, he knew it had been the right choice. "David, David!" Charlie's voice burst through the phone speakers as soon as the call connected. At 2.5 years old, Charlie was talking in full sentences now and had developed strong opinions about everything. "Hey, buddy," David replied, his face lighting up as Charlie appeared on the screen. What did you do today? Went to playground with Kate, Charlie announced, holding up a small toy dinosaur. Found dinosaur in sandbox. His name is Rory. David smiled at Charlie's excitement. These daily video calls had become a routine that both of them looked forward to. Even though David now lived close enough to visit regularly, the calls helped them stay connected on the days when they couldn't see each other in person. That's a pretty cool dinosaur, David said, examining Rory through the screen. What kind of dinosaur do you think he is? Big dinosaur, Charlie declared with certainty. With big teeth for eating leaves. Charlie's understanding of dinosaurs was still developing, but his enthusiasm more than made up for any scientific inaccuracies. David had learned that with toddlers, excitement was more important than being exactly right about everything. I have some exciting news, David said, unable to keep the surprise to himself any longer. Guess what we're doing this weekend? Charlie's eyes got wide with anticipation.
What we doing?
We're going camping, David announced. Robert and Kate said we can have our very first camping trip together. Charlie literally jumped up and down with excitement. Camping! With tents and fire. And marshmallows. That's right, David laughed. We're going to sleep in a tent and roast marshmallows and tell stories by the campfire. The camping trip had been Robert's idea. Over the past 6 months, Robert and Kate had become more like family to David than just the people who were raising his son. They included him in birthday parties, holiday celebrations, and family outings. This camping trip was going to be their first overnight adventure together as an extended family. Charlie chattered excitedly about camping for the rest of their call, making plans about what toys to bring and what animals they might see in the woods. When it was time to hang up, Charlie blew kisses at the camera, which had become their special way of saying goodbye. After the call ended, David looked around his apartment with satisfaction. The past 6 months had transformed not just where he lived, but who he was as a person. His apartment now had photos of Charlie covering the refrigerator, building blocks scattered in one corner, and children's books mixed in with his adult novels on the bookshelf. David had also grown closer to Lisa during this time. The romantic love they had once shared was completely gone, replaced by something deeper and more mature, a partnership in wanting what was best for Charlie. Lisa had built a good life for herself in Portland, working as a graphic designer and dating a kind man named Tony, who understood the complicated family situation and embraced it completely. Charlie talks about you constantly, Lisa had told David just last week. At first I worried that having so many adults in his life might confuse him, but it's done the opposite. He feels so loved and secure knowing that all these people care about him. The camping trip weekend arrived with perfect weather, sunny and warm during the day, cool enough for a campfire at night. David picked up Charlie early Saturday morning, and the little boy practically vibrated with excitement as they drove to the campground. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Charlie asked approximately every 30 seconds during the hour-long drive. Almost, buddy, David replied each time, smiling at Charlie's impatience. When they arrived at the campground, Charlie was amazed by everything. The tall trees, the hiking trails, the lake that sparkled in the sunlight. He helped David and Robert set up their tent, mostly by handing them tent stakes and offering lots of enthusiastic, but not particularly helpful advice. Tent goes up high, Charlie announced as they raised the tent walls. Like house but different. That afternoon, they took a nature hike around the lake. Charlie collected interesting rocks, pointed out every squirrel and bird he saw, and asked approximately 1,000,000 questions about everything they encountered. Why trees so tall? What fish live in water? Where do squirrels sleep? David found himself looking up answers on his phone when he didn't know them. Charlie's curiosity was endless, and David wanted to encourage it as much as possible. The highlight of the trip came that evening around the campfire. Charlie sat between David and Robert, roasting marshmallows and listening to the adults tell stories. When it was David's turn to tell a story, Charlie snuggled closer to him. Tell a story about trucks, Charlie requested. David made up an elaborate story about a little red truck that went on adventures through the forest, meeting friendly animals and helping other vehicles who got stuck. Charlie listened with rapt attention, occasionally adding his own details to the story. And then truck met bear. Charlie contributed excitedly. That's right, David said, incorporating Charlie's addition. The truck met a very friendly bear who needed help moving some logs. When it was time for bed, Charlie wanted David to tuck him into his sleeping bag in the tent. David had brought Charlie's favorite stuffed elephant, Peanut, and Charlie's bedtime routine was exactly the same as it was at home. Story, then song, then sleep, Charlie recited seriously as if David might forget the proper order. David read Charlie a book by flashlight, then sang the silly song that Kate had taught him that Charlie loved. As Charlie drifted off to sleep, he reached out and grabbed David's hand. "Best day ever," Charlie mumbled sleepily. "Love you, David." "Love you too, little guy," David whispered back. "Sweet dreams." Lying in his sleeping bag that night, listening to Charlie's peaceful breathing beside him, David reflected on how much his life had changed. A year ago, he had been a workaholic bachelor who measured success by business achievements and financial goals. Now his greatest accomplishment was making a 2-year-old laugh. His proudest moments were when Charlie learned new words or mastered new skills. The next morning, Charlie woke up before everyone else and quietly shook David awake. "David," he whispered. "Sun is up. Time for adventure." They snuck out of the tent together and walked down to the lake to watch the sunrise. Charlie held David's hand and chattered softly about the ducks they could see swimming in the distance. "This our special time," Charlie declared. "Just David and Charlie." "That's right, buddy," David agreed. "This is our special time." When they returned to the campsite, Robert and Kate were awake and starting breakfast. Charlie excitedly told them about the sunrise and the ducks, describing everything in great detail. "Charlie is getting so good at telling stories," Kate observed to David. "I think he gets that from you. You've always been good with words." The camping trip ended all too soon, but Charlie was already making plans for their next adventure. "Next time we bring bigger tent," he announced as they packed up their gear. "And catch fish. And see more bears." David promised they would definitely go camping again soon, and Charlie seemed satisfied with this plan. As they drove home, Charlie fell asleep in his car seat, exhausted from all the excitement. David glanced at him in the rearview mirror, still hardly believing that this incredible little person was his son. Back in Portland, David helped carry a sleepy Charlie into Robert and Kate's house. Charlie insisted on showing everyone his collection of special rocks from the camping trip, before finally agreeing that it was time for his nap. "Best weekend ever," Charlie announced as Kate carried him upstairs. "David is best camping buddy." That evening, David sat in his apartment thinking about the future. Charlie would start preschool in the fall. He was growing taller and smarter every day. Soon he would start asking more complex questions about why David lived in a different house, why he had 2 daddies, and how families worked. But David wasn't worried about those conversations anymore. Over the past 6 months, he had learned that love made families, not biology or living arrangements. Charlie had more people loving him than most kids ever experienced, and that could only make him stronger and more confident as he grew up. David's phone buzzed with a text message from Kate. It was a photo of Charlie fast asleep in his bed, still clutching one of his special camping rocks. "Thank you for giving him such a perfect weekend," the message read. "He's been talking about becoming a camping expert when he grows up." David smiled as he looked at the photo. Tomorrow was Monday, which meant back to work and normal routines. But it also meant another video call with Charlie, more chances to be part of his everyday life, and more opportunities to watch his son discover the world. A year ago, David had thought his life was complete. He had a successful business, a nice apartment, and freedom to do whatever he wanted. But he had been wrong. His life hadn't been complete at all. It had been missing the most important piece.